Hi, folks. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kenneth Arthur. I'm the CCO of visionid, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. We have about nearly 50 people on now, so conscious of everybody's time, we'll kick off. For those who don't know who visionid are, we're a 21-year-old managed service company with specialist expertise in enterprise mobility, barcode scan and print, location technology such as RFID, and we're based here in Clonmel with 40 employees, including a multilingual help desk. We were fortunate enough to come through the recent pandemic, thanks in part to a large and loyal customer base, predominantly in the life sciences and manufacturing vertical, and with over 40% of our services going across Europe and the US. And we also brought some innovative solutions to the market. One of those was SureTrace ID. Out of our RFID heritage, we developed a unique social distancing and digital contact tracing solution based on ultra-wideband, which helped keep us abreast of the latest COVID technologies. Now, conscious that many companies are now looking to return to the office, I'm sure most people working from home, they're as fed up as I am there. So we felt it would be good to share with you the experience of industry experts whose companies have been in continuous operation since the crisis hit last March, and are delighted to share their experience today. Before we kick off in earnest, we will be allowing some time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to ask questions throughout via the chat, and we'll attempt to answer as many of your queries as possible. It's intended to benefit everyone, so please don't be shy. So I'd like to welcome Martin Leahy, Senior IT Director of BioMarin in Cork, Avril Buckley, HR Business Partner, Cisco Ireland, and Senator Garret Ahearn, Fine Gael Shannon Spokesperson on Enterprise and Trade. Thanks, folks. I'm going to start off, I'm going to start off with you, Martin. Can you tell me a bit about your role and also a bit about BioMarin?
Yeah, I'm a Senior IT Director at BioMarin. BioMarin is a small biopharma company that specializes in medicine for orphan diseases. Orphan diseases are rare diseases that affect very small populations, usually children, and are life-debilitating diseases. So we have a number of medicines on the market that allow children to have normal lives, or lives close to normal, and in some cases are allowing life at all in the first place. So we have two manufacturing facilities, one in California and one in Shambali in Cork, and we would have a number of offices globally for regulatory and licensing purposes and so forth. In Ireland, we manufacture a lot of the commercial volumes of product for our patients. So we would be a key hub in the setup for BioMarin. So I manage all of the IT systems outside the United States, mainly manufacturing and laboratory quality, as well as our infrastructure and ERP systems and so forth.
Martin, I was in my local shop at the weekend, and I'm hearing everybody talking about the Pfizer, the AstraZeneca, the Janssen. Which one did you get? How does biodrugs differ from the mass production vaccine or typical drugs we see out there?
Well, ours is a very specific product and a very specific medicine with a very low volume of production. But I mean, it's no less vital than the vaccines. We would have had a situation where there was no question of us being closed at any point during lockdown or anything like that. We have a bioprocess which runs continuously, and we had to keep going 7x24x365 right through all the various levels of COVID and so forth that we had over the past 12 months. In terms of our process, it's not dissimilar to a lot of what the vaccines are, especially as we also do gene therapy, not in Cork, but it is part of our portfolio as well. But I suppose the similarities are 7x24x365. The difference would be the size of the patient grouping, Kenneth.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to a bit more about the technology perspective and how you kept it going over the pandemic. Avril, Cisco Ireland, obviously rebranding recently. Again, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Cisco Ireland and your role.
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. So I suppose, as Kenneth mentioned, obviously we're undergoing a rebrand to Cisco Ireland, and most people would be more familiar with our business as Palace Foods on the island of Ireland. So we're a food distribution business, and obviously, similar to Martin, had to keep, fully functional throughout the pandemic. Whilst we would service a huge variety of different customers from, coffee shops, restaurants, hotels, hospitals, care homes, essential facilities would be part of our core customer base as well, which obviously we're integral to keep our food supplies running throughout. So on the island, we have 4 different kind of key office facilities, from Cork to Newcastle West and Limerick, in Dublin, and also in Northern Ireland in Lisburn. And then we have a number of cross-dock facilities across the island as well, where a lot of our driver population would operate from. So we'd have approximately 1,200 employees based across the island, with, I suppose around 75% of those being frontline between our warehouse operators, our drivers, and our supply chain and operations, which were essential to remain on site and keep fully functional. And then in contrast, we'd have about 25% that switched to fully remote, as things started to happen. So a real blend of challenges, I suppose, as we entered into this pandemic, but, has been hugely positive for us on a whole.
And tell me, Avril, obviously from a hospitality business has been destroyed. Did you have to pivot, or was there any particular changes you made to keep the business going?
Yeah, and I think, I suppose whatever the industry was, there was an awful lot of innovation that had to happen, amongst businesses to, whether it was open new channels or adapt their offering. We certainly partnered very closely with our customer base, who overnight closed, but, ended up doing a fully takeaway option and have done for quite an extensive period of time. So, adapting their needs and their supplies to support that kind of pivoting of their offering throughout the last year or so.
Okay. Garret, I'd like to ask you what the Shannon does, but we'd probably be here all day. But from a personal perspective, you were just after being elected, you started a new job. How did that impact on you from a personal perspective and in a new role?
Yeah, no, look, first of all, Kenneth, thanks very much for the invitation, and thanks for hosting this today. I know your company quite well, and the work you do in Clonmel is a huge significance to the town, and the employment you give is excellent, and the work you do is fantastic. So just to thank you for that, and all your staff there. Yeah, no, look, it's I don't know, when I'm talking about politics and government decisions, we very rarely talk about our own personal experience, and it's been quite a unique year and a half for me, because I was a councillor and mayor of Clonmel before I became a senator, and we had a general election in early 2000, and after that a Shannon election, which consists of travelling the whole country looking for support and for votes, and the pandemic happened in the middle of that, so we were told to stop. But it was interesting, because when the pandemic hit, we were telling everyone to stay at home, not to go anywhere, to remain safe. While at the same time, on a personal level, I was starting a job where you go to Dublin every day, or almost every day. And because of how government works, you have equal representation throughout the whole country. So you have everyone from every area of Ireland meeting together in Dublin to make decisions at a critical time. But from a covert perspective, it's totally contradictory to the advice we were given. So on a personal level, that was
I think we've just lost Garret. Just give him a second to return. While Garret is trying to get back in, we can talk to him about broadband, the need to upgrade it. Martin, sorry, Garret, you're back. Yeah, we were just talking about the problems of broadband.
Oh, my apologies. The decisions that had to be made by government were quite tricky, and as a new person, there's no real time to settle in. You just have to do that. And as you said in your introduction, I was spokesperson for enterprise and trade, and the very first thing we did was a July stimulus package, which was, I think, 7.4 billion investment into trying to kickstart the economy during the summer months. So look, on a personal level, it's been been quite enjoyable, but the pressure of the first year in terms of trying to react to decisions that have to be made is certainly something unique from a government's perspective. It's not normally done that way.
Okay, thanks, folks. Martin, we'll go back to you. Martin, the immediate impact of the pandemic on BioMarin and the changes in technology that needed to be made. How did you approach that, and where did you start?
Well, I suppose the first thing we did, Kenneth, was we said, right, what's required to keep make, assess, and release running at the facility? Make is where we obviously make the product. Assess is where we test all our samples and so forth in our QC laboratories to make sure the medicine is within specification. And release then is where we deliver across to our various international patients. And once we had assessed, who was vital and what roles were vital to be on site for that, then we set about setting up a safe environment for those people and ensuring at the same time that those who were not absolutely necessary on our site could work effectively from home. So it was a two-pronged approach. So in terms of setting up our site, some of it was really basic, like, putting one-way systems into corridors, putting perspex screens in areas where people would work very closely together and all of that sort of stuff. Putting automatic cameras on doorways to record anybody's temperature, that kind of stuff. While on the other side, then we were, making sure everybody could work effectively on things like Zoom and Skype and so forth. We were widening the use of electronic data, document signatures, and all that sort of stuff. That was kind of in the first week or two. We put contact tracing systems in place, but they were manual, using logbooks and all of that sort of setup. And pretty quickly, we realized that it was time to start designing an automatic contact tracing system using wearables to get our people moving freely through the facility. So that was kind of the first push. And gradually we evolved better digital systems, like, we'll talk about the contact tracing system, and better social systems as well, because social connectivity was a huge part of what we had lost. So, meetings had to take on a different format. Our all hands meetings once a month for the site had to be very different. And we learned a lot as we went there. One other technology we use an awful lot more than we had done before was mobile video. Not just walking around with a phone, but I'm sure you're well aware of the various wearable devices, the glasses, the HoloLenses, the RealWear, all the different devices that are available now, Google Glass type items that allow somebody to participate in a Zoom call while walking on the manufacturing floor or while inspecting in the warehouse or anything like that. In actual fact, quite a number of our audits are now done remotely. We have people on site who wear the remote devices, and the auditors view the warehouse for stock counting or whatever without ever having to visit the site at all. That's something that's not going to, we'll never go back to what we had there. We'll stay on the remote there,
And in terms of it, and I suppose this is one of the key things here for people who are returning to the office, and the view from everyone, and we might confirm with Garret later, but social distancing, whether it's 2 meters or 1 meter, is going to continue. Contact tracing. So we obviously approached you at the start to see was there areas we could work together. In moving to a digital contact tracing system, what was the criteria for choosing that, and how did you test it, and over what period?
Yeah, I'm actually, I have one of the devices here with me. This is my one that I wear when I'm in the office. It's a wristband. Using ultra wideband, that's how it operates. The key for us was, number one, fast, efficient traceability. Because it's funny, when you have a youngish, reasonably healthy population, it's not COVID that causes the challenges for a business. It's the effect of COVID. If someone is a close contact, having to stay out of work for 2 weeks, we could take out an entire shift if we weren't careful, based on what they were experiencing in broader society or in their family. So contact tracing was critical for us, and fast, accurate contact tracing. One where we could change the distance if we needed, and also one that did not use Bluetooth. We're very, very clear that Bluetooth wasn't accurate enough, wasn't effective enough. So obviously the ultra wideband solution is what we were very keen to use. So what these devices allow us to do is, first of all, they'll buzz if you're less than 2 meters away from somebody else wearing the device. And second of all, that contact will be recorded. So it allows people to move freely through the facility and to connect with each other. They'll get the buzz if they're too close. They'll just step back a little bit, and they know the contact is being recorded as well. There was a great feeling of safety as a result of this. People even, in our Vox Pops and so forth said, I feel way safer in work than I do anywhere else because we have these systems in place. I suppose the other key for us was fast deployment. Once you have the devices, a couple of simple gateway hubs knocked up around your building allows you to very quickly connect with the cloud and run the connection software in the cloud. I mean, you remember, Kenneth, we went from bright idea in May of last year to trials in June to live in August. And, we'll take the Pepsi challenge with anybody on that. I've never seen a system go from idea to live so quickly. That's what allowed us to then roll this system out across the rest of our global offices as well. We would have, our head offices in California. I don't know, you'll know better than me, Kenneth, but I think we've about 6,000 or 7,000 devices now running worldwide based on that initial response.
Yeah, one of the things, and we found this, Martin, and I'm not sure, maybe you talked about people feeling safer. That was one of the things that we've noticed from companies we're talking to on our own staff when people started returning to the office. One of the things they were concerned about was kind of the social awkwardness. You come in on a Monday morning and if you're from Clare, people are more than happy to tell you that we were beaten at the weekend by Antrim, but they're on top of you, and there's always someone, and it's often very hard, especially maybe a senior manager, to say to someone, oh, here, give me my space, and people don't know what 2 meters is. How did your staff feel about helping that in terms of removing that social awkwardness, or what was the feedback?
Well, the key was safety. That was our first thing. We weren't just protecting the production of our medicine, we were protecting our own workers and our own community. And people understood very quickly that once the thing buzzes on your wrist, this was a company idea. We all decided on it together. There was no awkwardness about it. You just take a gentle step back and continue your conversation or whatever. And these devices are going to be with us for a fair bit of time to come. Even when everybody is vaccinated, contact tracing is still going to be there in case there are third or fourth waves or variants or so forth come in. So, it's important, I think, that people, include this in their overall menu of safety items when we do return to the work. It's not just about, hand sanitizing. It's not just about disposable plates or whatever. You need an ongoing system to make sure that contact tracing is there so that somebody will know immediately if they have been exposed to a case or a particular department has been exposed or whatever,
Okay. Thanks, Martin. Avril, I'm going to move over to you. Obviously, from being the HR person, your probably focus is on the people side rather than the technology. What were the main impacts from your perspective from a people? What were the concerns? Because obviously, like that, you had to keep people. What were the concerns that people were raising, and how did you deal with those?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as Martin echoed, I'm sure a priority for every business is the safety of not only keeping operations, but, most importantly, the colleagues that attend work or that are required to attend work. And that continues to be a focus. But yeah, in those very early stages, I think, the wider population was very nervous and very, afraid of, what was to come, what did everything mean, with daily updates as to, decisions being made for the wider economy. It was just a very turbulent time in general, and you could absolutely see that coming through in the workplace. And with so many businesses switching to fully remote, still needing to have people attend the office was difficult, I suppose, in that it posed challenges. But the absolute core and fundamental of it is communicating to the colleagues around the measures that the business can take and will take, and I suppose making sure that's a two-way dialogue, because what a certain cohort might completely appreciate and understand, others might have additional concerns that are unique to them or personal to them. And I suppose general communication on a company level about the measures, and as Martin said, multi-layered approach to protecting the colleagues in the workplace. But it also needs to be one-to-one individual, checkpoints with managers to make sure every single individual is content and assured that everything is being done to keep them safe. So I think it's just a matter of making sure that dialogue is in place and that it is robust to address any issues that might arise.
Yeah. And tell me, the fact that you had people having to go into the office to keep it up and you had people at home, in terms of that communication, interdepartmental, how did you manage that? And did it have any effect on productivity or morale?
Yeah, I think, look, it was certainly a challenge, and I think it will be a challenge, ahead for businesses that do go into kind of the hybrid as such that's been spoken about, part remote and part office bound. But, Martin touched on a lot of the technologies that exist that have, more than revolutionized and I think accelerated any modernization from a BT perspective, a lot of businesses. So I think it just needs to be at the forefront of every, I suppose, business decision as to how do you communicate effectively to every cohort, and, taking multiple steps to make sure that every population is reached effectively, whether that be, briefings that are recorded and replayed, or using video conferencing. And there's so much technology you can share in terms of, shared locations and documentations that we wouldn't have technically used before, but have really revolutionized what we're able to do now. So I think, looking at the BT structure that's available and trying to use all of those facets to make sure every person is reached is really, I suppose, what you have to do to make sure everyone's communicated with.
Okay. Garret, what were you hearing from companies? So obviously, being involved in enterprise and trade, and what were they ringing you up about? What were their big concerns?
Yeah, I suppose the biggest issue was looking for clarity, which is actually something that was quite difficult for government to really give. When government started in this pandemic, it was about trying to make decisions as quickly as possible. People would remember the comment in terms of, perfection is the enemy of good here in terms of decision making. And I suppose the view, certainly from the Taoiseach at the time, Leo, was that if we can get 70% of the decisions right, and possibly 30% of the decisions wrong, at least we're moving in the right direction. And I think certainly the view from government a year on into the pandemic is, if we can learn from the 30% of decisions that we got wrong, that it won't happen again. So if you look, and I was listening to Martin speaking there about technology, like imagine where we would be this time last year if that technology was there on the 14th of March, and it could be given to every single workplace, work environment. How we'd be able to control a pandemic so quickly. And those are the things we've learned now, because I think as a society, we'd be very naive to think that a pandemic won't come again. It might be the first time in our generation it's happened, but it certainly won't be the last. And that's the concern as a government we have. Can we be prepared better? Even though we were perceived to be relatively good throughout the world, but can we be better the next time this happens? But in terms of working with businesses, there's so many different sectors and different variables to it in terms of different support. So if you look at a sector that's been decimated, which would be the aviation sector, it's so difficult to give clarity to a sector like that when they'll be able to begin again, because it's based on so many variables. As opposed to supporting another sector, which could be retail, which we have guidelines in place of where we think we could be at a certain point. But clarity is always what business needs, and that's the one. It's the one thing you can't give with certainty.
Okay. And tell me, obviously, in fairness, the government reacted very quickly, and in terms of the PUP and financial support for companies, when you're reopening the offices, there's a cost to it again, because you want to make sure all the safety measures are in place, from sanitizing, from the technology, so different technologies. Now you're going to have an office open with probably 50% initially, and some people working from home. Will there be financial support available for companies who are looking to return to the office, utilising different technologies? And obviously they've had cost challenges already, but is there other financial support will that continue?
Yeah, so the short answer to that is yes. A detailed answer will probably come, I think, the last, if not the second last day in May, by the Taoiseach. And the view of government is that we need to ease back support. So it depends which supports you look at. So it supports for companies in terms of paying employees, like the EWSS. That'll be maintained for a long period of time. PUP payments will be kind of phased out But then payments in terms of CRSS, grant payments will remain, because it's not true to say that just because a company reopens that everything's all hunky-dory and back to normal. Getting back to normal is going to be a long phased process, and the supports that have been there through the last number of months in particular, but probably through the last year, and an awful lot of those have to be maintained. The other thing government will look at is, and we haven't done it up till now, which is pinpoint sectors which are really decimated over the last number of months, which is aviation, hospitality, live entertainment, a lot of those sectors that it'll take a long time to rebuild. So the supports they will need will be even excess of what most businesses would be looking for. But certainly the view from government is to phase out over a long period of time the supports needed.
And Martin touched on it there in terms of he believed the technology, contact tracing and social distancing is here for a while. Would that be your own view as well? Yeah,
it would be. I think we have we have to acknowledge social distancing will be here for quite some time. It'll certainly run into 2022, possibly beyond. The challenge we have, possibly beyond into 2023. The challenge we have as a government is variants, and we don't know where we'll be in a number of months. There's been a concern of the British variant, the South African variant, now the Indian variant, and they all come with different challenges. And we've got so used to social distancing now, and it's almost second nature to us in a work environment, that I think certainly from a government perspective, we'll be encouraging people still at the moment to work from home, but a kind of an easing back in over the next number of months as the vaccinations increase over the summer months. I think we'll see an easing back into the workplace, but a cautious approach, and the cautious approach will be mindful of social distancing. I don't think that's going to. I think if the last thing that will leave this pandemic is social distancing.
Yeah, I think there was some international commentary about and not being too doom and gloom about it, but until everybody is safe, no one is safe. So even when we get fully vaccinated in the country, as you said, variants come around, and we know that vaccinations are not going to hit other parts of the world for quite a while. And maybe just thinking of other parts of the world, Martin, and you mentioned rolling out SureTrace in the US. Obviously, different geographies bring different regulations. The US had a different approach, politically led, and now that's changed again. How coming normally solutions or anything that is coming from comes from HQ down to the regional, but you were able to bring a solution from regional to HQ. So how did you manage that, or how was the innovation thought of within BioMarin coming from Ireland?
I suppose we'd have a unique kind of a situation here in that we have a very effective, it's not that big, but we have a very effective IT team at the site, a lot of experience, and a kind of we would have had a reasonable gung-ho approach in terms of innovation in the past. We would have innovated a lot in factory floor automation and so forth. So I suppose that's where the kernel of the idea came up. And once the head office in the States and our other manufacturing facility in the States saw us going down the road, they said, you know what? This is as good as anything we're going to produce here. Why don't we let Martin and the Irish team build out what they've got there? That can be our trial. The manufacturing locations are very, very similar. And obviously, as our systems went from strength to strength, they realized, look, this isn't a case of which system anymore. It's a question of when and how can we get the system that has been built in Ireland. But this is something, and, we mentioned this in a conversation before. People often talk about, the multinationals come to Ireland just to ram out product and all of that sort of stuff. That's not the case at all. Time and again, innovation happens at ground floor level here in Ireland between the multinational companies and local expert technology companies. A bit like yourselves, or there's lots of others as well. And this is a classic case of it. This wouldn't be the first time we'd have seen a system exported back to the centre. They do. I mean, it's a feature of innovation, right? Innovation always happens on the edge. It always happens when you're supposed to be doing something else. The one way to kill innovation is to start an innovation department. You know what I mean? It's an organic thing. You know, you just need to get the right people into place and let them off, and you know, stuff appears. But yeah, I mean, you know, it wasn't that hard once we had proven the efficacy of the solution.
And Avril, I suppose in a different way, but from your side, you obviously have operations up north. You have operations in Dublin, in Limerick, Cork. Obviously, there was different regulations depending on the caseloads at the time. How did that impact on your thinking?
Yeah, and I suppose it's something we're consciously, you know, reviewing on a consistent basis, is what is the advices and the government, you know, restrictions in both jurisdictions that our business operates in. But I think ultimately, you know, the measures that we took, which were, you know, multiple, and Martin's echoed some of them, you know, the one-way systems around sites, introducing temperature checking, you know, realigning our offices to ensure 2-meter distancing where it was necessary, and also obviously short trace in terms of our contact tracing solution, were the kind of overarching decisions that the business made to protect our workplaces and our colleagues. And then it was just a matter of, I suppose, looking at those further in a very site-specific manner. So, you know, one-way systems mightn't be as easy to introduce to every site depending on layout and structures. But what we did very much see is, you know, regardless of where they were being introduced, we would have done some surveys early on and some pilots when we were rolling out, in particular, the contact tracing solution. And the same messaging was coming back from colleagues that it absolutely increased their levels of feeling safe in the workplace. It absolutely increased their levels of comfort in ensuring they were able to enforce the 2-meter distancing, like you said, Kenneth, without having to make it awkward or an issue when devices are actually physically alerting people. And, you know, that really stood to the business's response to the pandemic. And I think that would be the same for any business. You know, wherever these measures are being introduced, they will only serve to protect, you know, our people and our business. And it's just a matter of communicating effectively, you know, the benefits of these measures to our people.
Yeah, one interesting thing that people kept talking to us when we were telling us about, they were saying, yeah, we have the paper-based systems in place, we're doing all the logs, and people are recording, but no one was recording when they were going out for a cigarette break. No one was recording maybe some of the idle chats that they were having because they just wouldn't be thinking about it. And I know, Martin, you ran for a while in parallel the paper-based system and a digital contact tracing system. Did you see a difference, a significant difference in terms of what showed up as where the close contacts were? You're on mute, Martin.
There were, yeah, absolutely. There were huge differences. I mean, there was way more records in the digital system because the casual conversations and everything was being recorded, and also accuracy. You know, if you meet 3 or 4 people while you're down on the you know, in one of the manufacturing suites, and you got to go back and fill in the logbook, you're going to forget who you met first, which time you met whom, and all of that sort of stuff. So, you know, the digital record is comprehensive and it's also accurate, you know, you know, but that was no surprise really. I mean, we knew that was going to be the deal. We just had to prove that it worked, you know.
And Tammy, obviously from an investment perspective, we've seen some, you know, again, look, it's in, you know, you can't put a price on protecting people, obviously, but someone is always looking for a return on investment, and we saw from some people return on investment in kind of 16 weeks. Did you kind of measure return on investment, or did you look at kind of, well, if we didn't have such a solution, what projects wouldn't have been able to take place?
Well, we looked at a few different returns. One was the obvious one, the cost of the system, and we just compared that against the cost of making one batch of our medicine. You know, and it stacked up well. If it enables us to make a batch of medicine, then it's worthwhile doing. But there were 2 other real benefits. One was, you know, most businesses run capital projects where you're doing construction, expansion, all that sort of stuff. And our facility in Cork is right beside a very large Pfizer facility. And in January, when the, you know, the second wave hit really hard, or the third wave hit really hard, Pfizer had to stop all of their external construction, all of their capital investment, and all of their expansion for a period of almost two months in terms of outdoor construction. We were able to keep going fully because we had the Safe Trace system. And also, the other one was, you know, we were clear that we wouldn't have any problems with if we were designated as an outbreak location, and we weren't. But if we were going to be in that situation, we would find it very easy not to be defined as such, because we had such a comprehensive track and trace system. So the benefits are tangible from that point of view, as well as the health of our people.
And Avril, similarly, did you kind of run any ROI models on all the investments you were making? Did you see payback?
Yeah, and I remember very early on, when we were running our paper-based contact tracing, and how the view to moving to a digital solution came about was, we did undertake a what if scenario, and what if, we had case X, and, just ran a scenario where we had to do effective contact tracing, over the 72 hours prior. And 3 days in, by trying to rely on multiple systems, clock machines, badge swipes, actual manual records, CCTV, the list was starting to get pretty comprehensive in terms of just how much would need to go into one single effort to contact trace. And that really provided the foundation to look to a digital solution. And when you can compare that to a report in 10 seconds, that will give you a list of not only primary contacts, but you can then go further to identify secondary contacts of someone who was a close contact of the original case. It just, it says so much to the solution and the protections it provides to the business. And similarly, you think about what the net effect could be if a case happened that couldn't actually be, contained or traced confidently. And the net effect of that with, business operations that have to maintain is contacts could be multiple, and could in essence, shut down entire departments or shifts. And that is just not an option for a viable business who has so many frontline businesses to support in what we do. So those in themselves were absolutely, the foundations to do it, and more than justified the return on investment that was needed to make the solution happen.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, everyone is worn out when you get back into the offices. We want to be able to stay there, and people need to be able to be safe coming in there and not have further disruption. Maybe I'm going to change tack a little bit. So maybe, Garret, from your perspective, what has changed forever? So there's been some new laws, right to disconnect, right to remote work. What do you see having changed forever from an enterprise business perspective as a result of COVID?
Just before I go on to that, just to follow on from what Avril said, just in terms of from using a digital system to a paper system, anyone who's used a digital system that I've spoken to from a lot of companies I've spoken to, there's just no comparison. You'd never go back to a paper system. And the threat or the possibility of creating clusters and close contacts, and the cost effect that would have on a business, the knock-on effect that would have, outweighs hugely the difference between going from digital to paper. So I think most companies see the logic in it, and the advanced advantages to it. It's really interesting. We did a discussion a number of nights ago with the Taoiseach and employers and employees in terms of particularly around remote working, but challenges within the workplace and work environment, and how do they see things changing. And when you talk to both sides, employers and employees, they've really reevaluated their whole life, in particular their work life and their home life, and what's their priorities. And I think the real game changer is remote working, or probably more correctly, blended working. And an awful lot of people would see the option now to go to a workplace and say, look, if we're coming back in September, I'd like to do 3 days in work, 2 days at home, or vice versa. And I think employees would certainly be of the view that employers, if at all possible, should be able to accommodate that. And even from a government perspective, we're doing that. We're mandating that in the public sector from next year on, that 20% of your time working, so 1 day a week, will be remote working, and that's really important. It's a significant step for people in the public sector to be able to do that. But what we need to do, and which takes some time, and the right to disconnect is one element of it, is we need to put supports in place for employers to give that option to the employees. It's all well and good saying that all employees want to do it, and it's all well to say that employers want to be able to provide it, but they need the supports and the guidance around how to provide it for their employees. So as a government and as a committee on the enterprise and trade, our focus on the next number of months is how do we provide the guidance and the supports for employers to give employees those options. So that could be around opportunities of working from home, or the opportunities of working in hubs, in towns. So you would have an awful lot of people who might, certainly Martin would have people who would be working down in Cork, but might perhaps live in Tipperary or Clonmel, and have that option of not travelling 5 days a week, but maybe 1 or 2 days in Tipperary, and same in North Tipperary as well. So many people travelling to Dublin. But I think really the challenge for government is, and this was always going to happen. It's just this last year has speeded up that process by about 5 or 7 years. I think most people who worked in the private sector saw that this was the direction that the workforce were going, and how can we change to follow that. I just think it speeded up the process an awful lot in the last year, and government need to keep up with the pace of that. So we're putting a lot of investment in through different funds from different departments, but obviously that takes time. You can't just open up a hub straight away in a town. You need to manage it. You need to finance it. You need to source it and have people there to manage it, and that takes time. But certainly from a government's perspective, we do believe that blended working gives people options, and gives people who might necessarily not work in a company options to now work for that company or in a place they wouldn't have thought to work before. And it gives options for people to come outside of Dublin, outside of Cork City, to live in rural Ireland, but actually work for a company that might be based in an urban area. And that aligns with what government policy is, which is to encourage people to move out of major cities and live in rural towns, in rural areas.
Okay. I think the chat was disabled, but it's now enabled. And so if anyone has any questions, I'm conscious of time. But one that came in there, Garret, I think you might have touched on earlier, but is there any plans to revise or update the protocol to return to work that was issued last May?
Yeah, so the advice we have at the moment is to continue with to work from home if at all possible. That advice will continue for the time being. So different levels. So you'll remember the 5 levels that we would have had, which was level 5 was everyone would work from home unless absolutely essential. Level 4 was we recommend that everyone should work from home unless it's absolutely essential. And when you go down the levels, it still has the advice is to work from home if at all possible. Or certainly when we get to level 1, it's either work from home or have a balance between teams and hubs to some be in work, but kind of do it in pods in that sense. But look, I think the realization is that if the vaccination program keeps going at the pace it's going the last number of weeks, we're going to be in a position mid-summer, late summer, to see the opportunity for people to be back in work if they want to go back to work, and for employers to have employees back to work if they want to be back to work. We talk privately. We haven't publicly made a statement on it, but like we probably think privately, September seems a very clear possibility for having some sort of normality in terms of people who want to be back in work full time can be back in work full time. But again,
I suppose one of the things I'd maybe challenge you there is, as you know, the government could easily, you could do all your Shannon meetings on Zoom, but you see the need to be inside in the office. So should there be more trust given to employers to say, right, you know, people like BioMarin, Palace, all these companies have been in operation, they're using offices, we're trusting them, because it's not in anyone's interest. The last thing we need is an outbreak, either from an employee perspective or from a corporate branding perspective. So would you say that maybe the government would start to trust and say, look, guys, open up when you need to, as you need to, and just make sure you have the right measures in place?
Yeah, like I suppose the way to look at it is it's advice rather than mandated. So if you look at Martin's company, they're an essential company. Same with Avril. if employees have to be in work, that they're in work. It's for the employers to decide essentially if they need to be in work. For us, it's quite funny. We actually have to be there because there's a law in place in the Constitution that you can't vote remotely. If you see in the House of Commons at the moment, they can have meetings and have votes through Zoom without being in the House of Commons. By law, we can't vote on any legislation unless we're actually in the chamber, and that legislation can't be changed unless there's a referendum. And to have a referendum, you have to get loads of people together to vote. So there's complications in that. But I do think certainly government are cautious, and the advice we get from NEFIT would be extremely cautious in terms of bringing large number of people back to a working environment. But if you have companies like your own, like Martin, like Avril, where you're ahead of the game in terms of contact tracing, in terms of managing your employees in a safe environment, that's a different level of safety than other companies would have. So I think those things should be taken into account when people are coming back.
Okay, I suppose a question there for Martin and Avril. Well, two questions. One, anything you would have done differently, but also, what advice would you give to any employer now who's trying to get back on site? So maybe was there any mistakes made? Did you kind of say, look, this is something we could have done differently? Because look, as Garret mentioned earlier on, it wasn't about being perfect. It was a speedy response. So what would you have done differently, and what advice would you give to employers bringing employees back on site? I'll pose that to Avril first.
Yeah, I think, the famous saying, hindsight is a wonderful thing. And, there's so much we've learned in the last 15 months or so since the pandemic hit that, would we have known at the time, would even, government and the broader economy have been in different circumstances? Possibly. I think, as a company, we're pretty, I suppose, having done reviews, we're pretty content that the measures we took are more than appropriate, and certainly were. I don't think there's anything we'd look back and say we didn't get right. I think, communication was absolutely key and continues to be a focus. I think, if we could have done things a little bit sooner, more along the lines of the contact tracing, absolutely, that would have been of benefit, certainly. But I think, the important thing moving forward from now is not to get complacent and not to take the foot off the pedal in terms of ensuring we can provide safe physical work environments for our people. The vaccination program is doing great things, but as we've very well acknowledged, social distancing isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and we need to continue to focus, our efforts and our technologies on safe environments for our people.
Okay, Martin, same question to you. Anything you would have done differently, and advice to employers bringing employees back?
There isn't a whole lot we think we would have done differently because the situation evolved so quickly. There are a few things, like you don't hear much guidelines now around, sterilizing surfaces and all of that sort of stuff. That was a huge deal a year ago. We spent a lot of money on getting our places constantly being cleaned and so on. You wouldn't do that knowing what you know now about COVID, but we didn't know it at the time. So there's a few things like that. In terms of the future, this is a massive opportunity for business, and we see that in BioMarin at the moment. If you're going to have people who are working in remote offices or from their home office for part of the time, and they're going to be in your own office at different times, then even the purpose of your building changes. A lot of your silent work, your reading of documents, your writing of documents, that kind of stuff, an awful lot of that will happen at home. And in the facility, in work, you're going to be socially connecting an awful lot more with people. So single occupancy offices, there's no point in them anymore. You might as well be at home. So we're looking at in BioMarin at changing the environment, building even hubs within our building where people work together at shared tables, high tables, gather around screens, that type of stuff. There's still silent areas if they want them, but the office is being repurposed for a different thing. It's a massive opportunity to change the way we interact socially and innovate at work. But the other thing to be very, very careful about with this right to switch off and this right to work remotely on specific days is if you're not careful, you'll end up with everybody coming in on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday doing exactly what they've always done. and taking Monday and Friday at home. And the place becomes a ghost town on Monday and Friday. And it becomes a 3-day-a-week operation because you can't get somebody on a Friday because they go out to their caravan or whatever on a Friday, that type of stuff. And be very, very careful that you leverage this as a real opportunity, but you don't drift into this, because you must grab a hold of it and take active steps to make sure your business thrives. Use the opportunities to make sure that the negative human behaviors don't drift into a situation that won't work for you.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. What are the panel's view of employers insisting employees prove they have been vaccinated before coming back on site after working from home? And how do they feel about legislation in New Zealand supported by the government there stating no jab, no job? Tricky one. Avril, I'll let you answer that one first.
Thanks. And look, I think there is very limited information, for employers out there at the moment as to what the views are with regards to vaccination. Obviously, it's not being mandated on the population that it is a must-have. So, I think as it stands, the responsibilities of the employer is to risk assess any, circumstances that they know that may pose a risk. And I think, it's important to have any dialogue with any individuals who are making that choice for themselves. And I think, there has to be an appreciation and understanding that might be for a number of different reasons, whether it be religious or, medical grounds. It can get quite complex beyond a yes or a no to a vaccine as to what the actual kind of, reasoning is behind that. And I think, as I said, for an employer, I think it's about risk assessing and constantly risk assessing amongst your population what that poses to the working environment. And then, on a one-to-one basis, what are the adaptations that you can make that are reasonable, that will allow for, safety for that colleague and also the remainder of the workforce in that circumstance. And I would hope more, guidance and support will come to employers in time for that specific scenario. But at the moment, I think that's the extent of what we can do.
And Martin, obviously, vaccine hesitancy is probably much more prevalent in the US. So again, is that part of your thinking, making sure that these solutions or all the measures you've taken will be in place for quite a while?
Yeah, and I mean, we have to look as well, and Garret mentioned it earlier, variants are going to be part of the action for quite some time. And, as a particular variant emerges, it might be a challenge to a particular type of vaccine grouping or whatever. So, if you look maybe at what's happening in some other countries where, fast antigen testing is happening twice a week in schools, for example, in a lot of the Northern European countries, then you have a situation where you have a vaccinated population and you also have regular testing going on and, quick indicating of whether there's a problem emerging or not. I think that's where it's going to go, Kenneth. We're never going to have a situation where it's legally mandated to vaccinate. Employers are allowed to move somebody to a safer space or safer job if they want to. But I think it's going to be the continued collective effort to track and trace and identify is the only way. You're eventually going to get to a point where there'll be boosters every year, catching up with whatever variants emerge during that year. And that's the way this is going to go. Just like the flu. The flu vaccine is different every year for the same reason.
Yeah, it wasn't. It's no coincidence that with all the social distancing, all the cleansing that was taking place, we had very little cases of flu last year. So yeah, I do think a lot of this will stay. Garret, any views on the legislation? No jab, no job. Or you might be hesitant to answer that one.
Just the point that Martin said about boosts, like the government are already preparing for boosts for people after September. So in terms of legislation, I think the language is important. So you don't want to tell people that they have to do it. That causes that can cause real problems, and it can actually backfire on you in a lot of ways from a government's perspective. I think the challenge here for government, or certainly the view we're looking at the moment, is incentivizing people to take the vaccine, and incentivizing them in ways in terms of travel, whether that's traveling abroad, whether that's using public transport. It makes it quite difficult then for someone who hasn't taken the vaccine to normally move around the country or go to work or however they normally travel. But No, we're seeing in other countries, in Israel in particular, where about 10 to 15% of the population just don't seem to want to take the vaccine. And, even when you have the most vulnerable vaccinated, you still don't have the virus controlled. And the more people that take it, the more control we have under it, the easier it is to open up and everything that goes with that. So I think the guidance that we'll be bringing forward at the end of this month will have in it a certain level of encouragement for people who might be hesitant to take the vaccine.
Okay. Right. Just conscious of people's time. If there's any last questions, I know there was one there in relation to SureTrace that Martin showed the watch. There was a question. They also come in lanyards, and we can send on information to people. We'll also be sending to those who've registered a copy of the webinar. So feel free to share. And if there's any questions, come back to us. So any closing thoughts from the panel?
I'll go first there. Very similar to what I said a second ago. We're emerging from this now. People have done a great job, but we are moving into a steady state where we'll have to be aware of this COVID for quite some time. But there are massive opportunities. We've all matured so much in the last year. There's a joke goes around in technology circles. Who's had the biggest influence on your digital technology? Is it your CIO? Is it your chief architect? No, it's COVID. COVID has jumped us forward 10 years in 1 year. Both in our digital footprint and also in our use and ideas around how we work together. So it's a great way. It's a great step forward, provided we maintain the care.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Avril?
Yeah, I think, certainly COVID has posed many challenges to businesses, but I think, there's been a real resilience shown not only in the population, but in, businesses and the employees that are employed within. I think there's a huge positive to take on some of the depth of relationships that have been built in, particularly the business to business relationships over the last, year and a half that have really pulled together to work with each other to build networks and supports, and SureTrace with yourselves, putting in measures to make sure that we're keeping our people safe. And I think, I've said it several times, but I think communication and dialogue, as we have moved through each of the stages that the pandemic has posed, we still have a road ahead to navigate what the new normal, as we say, will look like. So I think, just being open to trialing things and, to have open dialogues and conversations and set up working groups within businesses to feedback, sentiments and experiences, to educate employers as well will be invaluable going forward.
Okay, thanks, Avril. Garret?
Yeah, no, just to touch on what Avril and Martin said there, I think it's amazing how companies have adapted so quickly over the last year, and the resilience of companies, and actually the resilience of the Irish people in general in how they've coped. Like the last 6 months have been the most difficult 6 months for anyone, no matter what age group you're in, no matter what gender you are, no matter whether you work, whether you're at home, whether you're retired. It's been so difficult, and the resilience of the Irish people has been phenomenal. But I certainly think from a work perspective, it's really opened our eyes to really what's possible and how quickly you can make changes that you want to make. Often in politics, you see changes happening quite slow. I think the one thing we'll always see when people are putting pressure on us, making changes or bringing in legislation, the argument from this year on will always be, well, you did it very quickly in 2021. Why can't you do it now? So I think we've proven that as a government, you can actually act quickly and bring in emergency legislation. So I think that'll be a challenge for us going forward. But I just on a view from a political perspective, I think the resilience of people, either in the workplace or at home, has been just phenomenal. And I think when we look back in 10, 20 years' time, that's the thing we'll take away, just how resilient people were through the year.
Yeah. Okay. Look, thanks very much to the panel. Thanks for giving of your time. I think you've touched on a lot of points for me from both our internal and from an external perspective. The technologies are out there. I people shouldn't be fearing returning to the office. I think people should be ready to kind of start planning it. And probably no matter what technology you're using, communication is critical. How you communicate with the staff, how you communicate internally. So it's critical that you embrace the technologies that are out there, but them in themselves won't be able to be successful unless you're communicating properly and everyone's working together. And events like this where people are sharing ideas, I think hopefully we'll see more of this in the future. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Thanks for the questions. We haven't been able to answer them all, but we'll be able to come back to you directly. And thanks in particular to Garret, Avril and Martin for your time. Thanks, folks. Take care.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.